Hello and welcome to Instant Insights. At GlobalData Strategic Intelligence, we track over 100 tech, industry, ESG, and macro themes impacting all major sectors. I'm Emma Sturdee, and today I'm joined by three analysts from the GlobalData's technology team. Emma Mohr-McClune, Service Director, Rena, Bhattacharya, Chief Analyst and Practice Lead, and Emir, Halilovic, Research Director. They have all kindly agreed to come today to talk about the impacts of Trump's tariffs on the technology sector. Hi guys, thanks for joining. So first question I'd like to ask you is what tariffs will most impact the tech sector and when are they likely to come into force?
The silence to that question, Emma, is really indicative of the amount of uncertainty that everyone in the tech sector is facing when it comes to this tariff question, because the story is constantly evolving on a daily basis. Even this week, we've had two or three different new twists in the story. Every single company will be impacted in some way. The degree is unclear still after weeks and weeks of this question being open. And at this point of time, nobody knows.
Yeah, I think, from my point of view, just looking at what's going on, I mean, obviously of the concrete measures that have been announced and probably will come into force. I mean, the 55% tariff on Chinese imports to the US is probably the first one that will definitely have some kind of impact on tech sector. I mean, I don't know, Rena, Emma, if you share the opinion.
Yeah, I think that will be huge. No, I agree, Emir. And I just to echo what Emma and Emir are saying, I mean, there is so much uncertainty and so much is changing. And, I think two of well, the items really that are in the news from my perspective, because I cover AI, is what's going to happen with processing and what kind of tariffs are going to be placed on chips or GPUs and what equipment will be impacted. And that's changing all the time. At one moment, there's supposedly a 20% tariff that's then going to go up to, 145%, but then it's pulled back. And then is this 25% tariff that was supposed to take place, just a few days ago, going to be brought back? And there's just so much uncertainty that you kind of just need to plan for uncertainty as much as you can. But it's not just tech components that will impact the industry. There are other pieces like steel and aluminum, which are used in construction and that are used in, say, data center construction and used for AI processing. That's in place, and that will impact ultimately the cost of processing for all organizations.
Yeah, I agree. And just to pick up on something Rena was saying, when you look at the world of tech, the last 20 years has seen the development of a phenomenal supply chain management engine. We're talking about software, hardware, middleware. It's been allowed to develop in the last 2 decades because of stability and certainty. And these tariffs are throwing all of this certainty out of the window. And the supply chain doesn't react well under that stress.
Yeah, definitely. And, to top it off, the situation with the supply of rare earth materials and so on, that one is kind of like a huge ticking time bomb, I would say, because rare earths are primarily exported by China, imported by very much everybody else in the world who is involved in high-tech manufacturing. And right now, the situation is very unclear, not only when it comes to Chinese exports into the US, which are tentatively agreed, but there are no details exactly on how many export licenses China will actually issue for exports to the US, but also Chinese exports to other countries, to Europe, for example, have been practically stopped for some time now, which also affects high-tech manufacturing everywhere. I mean, everything from magnets to semiconductors requires some rare earth metals, and right now that supply is very much constrained as well. So yeah, it's a complete let's say reshuffling of the deck when it comes to international supply chains and global supply chains, and that is definitely going to impact all the players in the industry.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking, topic of this conversation is tariffs, but this whole issue is much broader than just tariffs. It's really a global trade war, and there's so many moving parts and so many players, and there's so much back and forth. I think it's really an issue that's much broader than tariffs per se.
Thank you. In terms of different subsectors of tech, does the impact of tariffs change depending on the subsector of a tech company it operates in?
Well, I'd say to a degree. I'm covering telecom technology manufacturers and telecom technology vendors primarily, and telecom technology vendors tend to be very large companies with already geographically diversified manufacturing, but they are also going to suffer some kind of impact because of their supply chains, which are inevitably global in nature, and because the hardware they make is complicated, complex, and requires many different components that get supplied from many different places. I would say that situation, I don't know, Rena, Emma, like on the enterprise and consumer side, the situation is differing a little bit or not.
Yeah, I think it does depend a bit on the organization. I mean, of course, everyone is going to be impacted to some degree. Enterprises that are purchasing telecom services or tech services ultimately may see pricing go up. And when they want to, say, purchase more processing for AI, they may ultimately see the price of that going up. I mean, that's a different impact than, say, if you are a chip manufacturer, such as TSMC, that now needs to move where its production facilities. I mean, that's very disruptive to then have to move these facilities back into the US. So there are different degrees of impact, but by and large, everyone will be impacted.
Yeah, and then, sometimes just moving your production or, manufacturing capacities to another place, or, to the US, if you want to evade US tariffs, you may just get into a smaller kind of bind, but a bind nevertheless, because then, for example, the rare earth imports affect you, or just different component sourcing gets also complicated. So it's really a whack-a-mole almost of how to navigate these very turbulent times.
So say you're an organization that has large manufacturing facilities in somewhere like Asia, and you choose to move these back to the US where the cost of labor is higher. What do you do then? Do you then invest in more automation and robotics to try and increase efficiencies and bring down costs? So in that scenario, you're completely changing the way your business operates. And that's not easy to do. Requires a huge investment.
Yeah, and it requires time as well. So it gets really complex real quickly, that kind of exercise.
Thank you. Do you have any insight in which tech companies are most exposed to the tariffs?
Well, certainly anyone making equipment, Emma, right? So if you think about Apple, Apple is endlessly fascinating in this context, of course, because it's a US flagship company of extraordinary dimensions and importance to the consumer services space. Now, the tariffs are designed to encourage Apple to consider manufacturing more of its devices in the US. That's the goal. In fact, Apple doesn't really manufacture devices at all. Apple is an expert supply chain management and logistic engine. That's what it does. It has something like 200 suppliers based in China, and over the last 2 decades, the Chinese government has been giving out enormous subsidies to build up an extraordinarily complex ecosystem of mass marketing, of mass manufacturing. So we're talking about everything from transportation, logistics, from quality control, component manufacture. And this has been a long-term investment and a long-term project for China, and Apple has been one of the world's biggest beneficiaries of this level of expertise. They've also been educating the workforce for component engineering. It's almost impossible to imagine Apple replicating this level of expertise in anything like the short to mid-term. So now we come to the question, could Apple do that? And obviously they can't immediately, but if you answer the question with a yes, potentially, then you're looking at massive government subsidies, which will be required to replicate that level of ecosystem complexity that took China 2 decades to create. And that means Apple will no longer be a supply chain management expert. They'll be truly a manufacturer of devices. But that is going to take extraordinary investment. And we are also recommending US subsidies because there's simply no way that Apple will be able to do this without that. And then we're back to, then it becomes a vicious circle, right? Because then there will be no more tariff revenue or labor benefit from this kind of move.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a big question whether you do have, whether you have a workforce pool to replicate the situation that you have in Asian manufacturing hubs.
Right.
That's really an unknown that not many people have been considering. When it comes to automation that Rena mentioned, I have recently spoken to a telecom supplier who was talking about possibility of moving one of their production lines to the US, but with a caveat that that production line for that specific those specific sub-assemblies that we've talked about is mostly automated. So in that case, yes, nominally the manufacturing would be coming back to the US, but no or a negligible number of people would be actually working on that on those production lines. Therefore, the impact on the domestic labor market would be negligible for the US. So that really is another aspect in high-tech manufacturing that needs to be taken into account.
I mean, I would answer that, Emir, by saying actually no, the US is not in a position to replicate China's workforce precision engineering expertise at this time. And that is simply the reality that Apple and others are facing today. Automation will help somewhat, but this will take a lot of time, investment, and it can't be done fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. What do you think are the bigger picture ramifications of the tariffs on the tech sector?
For me, one of the things that comes to mind is that it will really just speed this move towards de-globalization or greater regionalization that we've been seeing, especially in the AI space, whereby countries see artificial intelligence as critical to their national and economic security, and they need to have access to processing capabilities. And if we're all going to be implementing these types of more protectionist policies, and it's everyone or every region for themselves. And I do expect this to continue to drive this movement towards greater AI sovereignty, which includes not only the chips and the processing, but also things like investment in startups, what kind of capital's available to invest in local markets, and investment in building up local talent and trying to keep it within their own borders. So I think there could potentially be a lot of shifts, not in the near term, but down the road in the medium term, as these issues have really heightened the need for building up a strong national AI tech economy.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I've been kind of commenting on this, let's say, deglobalization of the sector that I'm covering, and it is definitely just going to continue. But another kind of consequence of what's going on, of the deglobalization, kind of closing into regional or sub-regional borders, that is definitely slowing down the pace of innovation. Right now, the innovation is global still, because there is still access to different research, to different technologies. At least you can follow what the others are doing. Even if let's say suppliers from other countries or other regions are unable to sell in your kind of geographical area. But if this trend continues of deglobalization, the whole tech industry is inevitably going to slow down its pace of innovation, because that's just what happens. I mean, in the worst case scenario, when you just have a small number of vendors selling in very kind of limited geographical areas, what you get is very much like almost a glacial pace of innovation, because then the pace of innovation is dictated by a very few entities. So that's, in my view, I see this as a consequence and a peril for this type of development that we're witnessing right now.
And I'd fully agree with what Rena and Emir were saying. It does mean a fundamental destabilization for the global supply chain. And as Emir was saying, that's bad for innovation. As Rena was saying, that brings new pressures into the ecosystem. Until that certainty is resolved and until there's a guarantee of continued certainty for that, I think we're all in a holding position.
Thank you. That was all really interesting. We definitely things to keep watch on in the future. I think sadly that's all we've got time for today. But thank you so much for coming on this podcast and taking the time to answer these questions. Thank you for those instant insights. Thanks for listening. And from us in Strategic Intelligence, see you next time.